Sigue en sintonía de nuestra programación.
Está empezando el show del doctor Roy Aranda, donde abordaremos temas sobre separación niños de padres, casos de violencia, traumas con los indocumentados, cómo resistir ante tiempos de pandemias. Llámanos en vivo al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 6, y haz tus propias preguntas al aire. ¡Comenzamos!
Okay, good evening, my dear Tribuna TV viewers. Today is December 1, 2022. Oh my, how time flies. It's amazing. It seems to me that it was January of 2022 when I did a show looking forward towards 2022, what lies ahead. And I had just come off of a show with my consultant, Dr. Peter Canaris, on holiday blues for 2021 and overcoming them and what 2021 was like and looking forward to 2022. And here we are at the cusp of my doing another show in 2 weeks also with Dr. Canaris, my consultant. It'll be on December 16th, focusing on, shedding, leaving behind 2022 and hopefully moving into the brighter sunshine of 2023. So that's in 2 weeks. Buenas noches, televidentes, a la famosísima Tribuna TV. I always make it the very famous Tribuna TV in Spanish. Hoy estamos Diciembre 1 del 2022. Tenemos un show muy interesante. We have an interesting and needed, very needed show. Regrettably, it's a show, the topic that's really a very painful, disheartening, difficult topic to deal with. But unfortunately, looking at reality, it's so prevalent, and the problems associated with suicide, which is the topic for today, are so important that I thought it was really important to do a show today. And that's what we have planned for you today. Tenemos un show sobre el tema importantísimo del suicidio hoy día. And the title is Life on the Line: What's Behind the Rise in Suicides and What Can We Do to Prevent Them? And I have 3 delightful guest experts today. And what I am so delighted about is that they are all students. I have Micah Zylstra, who is a doctoral candidate at Delphi University, who did a wonderful, wonderful research in the area of suicide that I'll leave to him to share with you some of the specifics. But it was so good that it caught the attention of New York State Psychological Association, and he was awarded the Roy Aranda Poster Award. Yes, I do a lot of things for students, so they threw my name in there. The other 2 students, Denise Gregory and Marilyn Bermeo, happen to be forensic psychology students in my class at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and they wrote a wonderful, wonderful paper on bullying and cyberbullying and the impact of bullying and cyberbullying, including heightened suicide risk. So I couldn't have asked for a better assortment of guests today. So that said, Oscar, I wanted to give him a shout of thank you. He is the producer. His magic is what you see on the screen. Without him, there would be no show. You wouldn't see me, you wouldn't see any of us on the show. Don Oscar, ¿quieres saludar a los televidentes? Would you like to greet the viewers? Okay. Good health, happy holidays. He always promises me pupusas, but I give up. I'm going to stop asking. I'm just going to order them from the local Salvadorian deli that's in my neighborhood. I think that's the only way I'm ever going to get them. So, dicho eso, the show is being recorded live on YouTube. There will be a recording tomorrow on several platforms, including, of course, YouTube, Tribuna TV's website, Facebook, and other platforms. Okay, so I encourage. We're covering a lot of information. Suicide, frankly, it's a topic that is so intricate and so many aspects to suicide that really you need a whole semester, if not more. And people who specialize in this, well, they're getting training nonstop. So for me to try to do a program that benefits the viewers, which is my hope, it's the intent that I have, is to provide a comprehensive overlook, a comprehensive introduction to this complicated topic so that it would be useful and beneficial to the viewers. And we're squeezing that into approximately an hour and 15 minutes. But we have several slides as usual. I invite the viewers to take photos of the slides once they are up so you can review them later. Or once you have access to the recording, you can take screenshots. Okay, it's my considerable interest in you having access to this and recognizing that you're not going to have all of this memorized. There's a lot to cover. It's again a difficult overview, and I hope that I can squeeze in some of the more salient aspects of suicide in general with my guests. That said, Oscar, por favor, me puede poner el primer slide. So here, as usual, you see the name, A Life on the Line, What's Behind the Rise in Suicides, What Can We Do to Prevent Them? I'm the host. Here's my guest, Micah Zylstra, Denise Gregory, Marilyn Bermeo, my consultant, Dr. Peter Canaris. You've seen him on several occasions, and he will be my guest in 2 weeks. And I have a friend who's been a bit like a son, a little older than that, but he's been a loyal friend, and he's always been ready to comment and give me his feedback on the show and to comment on Facebook. And I thought that I had to give him some credit. So shout out to Cosme Hellis, who I have officially made my assistant consultant. So thank you, Cos. You've been a good friend all these years. So suicide was declared a public health crisis in the United States as far back as 1999. So we're going 23 years ago. And it doesn't mean that it wasn't a crisis before that. It's the leading cause of death in the United States. It's a leading cause of death in the United States. I think it's approximately the 12th leading, with 46,000 deaths in 2020. This is about one death every 11 minutes. The number of people who think or attempt suicide is much higher, of course. In 2020, about 12.2 million adults seriously thought about suicide, 3.2 million planned a suicide attempt, and 1.2 million attempted suicide. Overall, the suicide rate increased 30% from 2000 to 2020. I will share with the viewers, and I imagine that my guests would probably concur with this, that I'm pretty sure that these numbers are low estimates, because not every successful death by suicide is necessarily viewed as a suicide. It may be given another cause, may be given an overdose of drugs. There may be some other cause. And of course, we don't know the people who don't report that they have suicidal ideation. They don't. We're just aware from surveys, who agrees, yes, I do, or yes, or this is what happened to me. So we're missing a population of people that either are deniers or they just don't want to come forward. And this is across the board. Micah, quickly, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. There's still a lot of stigma. That's going to be a theme of, I think, our conversation tonight, towards suicide. So historically, they are underreported.
All right, getting back to slide one. ¿Todavía está el primer slide, Oscar? All right, suicide attempts cause serious emotional, physical, economic impacts. The financial toll on society is costly. In 2019, Suicide and non-fatal self-harm cost the nation nearly $490 billion in medical costs, work loss costs, and the value of life and quality of life costs. Suicide also, I wanted to share with the public, is a leading cause of death globally. We have a staggering loss of 800,000 lives each year. Again, I believe this is probably a bit of a low estimate. I've seen other data as high as 1 million a year. Scientists warn that the trend may be hard to reverse. In this show, we'll provide several informative and educational slides, resources, as I've suggested, to viewers to help empower them. We're going to focus on suicide rates, myths about suicide. I already covered something about the suicide rate, so we'll repeat that a bit. Myths about suicide, some aspects of suicide, some definitions, desire, intent, attempts, risk, protective factors, warning signs. Go into more detail on what risk factors are, what warning signs means and what some of them are, what protective factors means and what some of there are. My doctoral student, Michael, will talk about his research, which I thought was very interesting, and focus on protective and risk factors in a particular context. And strategies, basically, what are some of the interventions that are available? Lastly, resources with some very specifically geared towards suicide. I always dedicate my show to all viewers who have watched. You know this. I'm dedicating the show to all viewers who are caught in the web of suicidal thoughts and behaviors and painful losses from suicide. If this show alone tonight is helpful to some viewers who have suicidal thoughts and helps them so that they want to seek out help, or that they realize that life is so worth living, or others who are worried about loved ones, that they think, gee, maybe I should do something. And if this show alone is able to help even one person, I will have accomplished my goal. That's what I'm setting out to do today. Oscar, puedes sacar the primer slide. Please take the first slide down. Put slide number 2. I'm going to introduce my guests, and then we'll get into of the show. Tienes a slide 2? So this is Micah Zylstra. Micah, why don't you talk us? The viewers can take a screenshot or photo of your brief bio that's posted there. But I would prefer just to hear from you. What is it? What brings you to my show today? Basically, why are you here? Background.
Why am I here? It's a great question. And my bio, on the screen doesn't look so brief afterwards, so it might be a big screenshot. But right now I'm a doctoral student at the Delphi University, and my main research has been on suicide. Right now it's been the relationship between suicide and COVID-19, which we can see it was a really traumatic experience, and how suicide relates with other aspects of mental health functioning. Before being in my doctoral degree, I worked in a number of different settings, and suicide has been a part of my professional work from the very beginning. So I worked as a suicide prevention counselor in a New York City 988 call center, and I worked there extensively for a number of years. I was the training specialist there during the pandemic, so I got a very intense experience of what the pandemic was like from people across the country. It's very personal. It was really challenging for people, as we all know. Before that, I've worked in other settings as well, but ultimately I've been really driven to understand more about suicide, what is going on. And I really like what you said about helping one person being able to connect with people. What you find is that suicide is often a very isolating experience for people who are suicidal. So being able to connect with people, I think, is around this topic is really important.
And I think it's especially important this time of the year that we have the major holidays. And by them, I refer to the period from Thanksgiving all the way to New Year's. We are so inundated with different holidays and shopping, and the pressure to go out and shopping and buy gifts and everything that's going on. in our in the United States in terms of what we hear in the news all the time. So I think that there's a very robust impact of possible stress and anxiety and depression and concern and preoccupations this time of the year in general. But I think that, you know, what's going on in the specter of what we've been seeing recently with so much violence and things like that, and questions about, you know, the rising cost of gas and other things, and how you have to pay more money to get the same things you were paying for a year ago. I think that that's really adding a burden, and that added burden translates into increased stress. So I'm delighted that you're here and that you accepted my invitation. Okay. Oscar, por favor, puede poner el slide número 3. So, ese es el 2, el 3. Okay, so Denise, please, why don't you take it away also? Let us know what brings you here. I did not twist your arm to come, so let it be known. John Jay College criminal justice students are safe.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Denise. I am a first-year master's student at John Jay College. I recently just changed my major to forensics mental health counseling. So sorry about that, Dr. Aranda. But I'm here because Dr. Aranda invited me, and I did my paper with Marilyn on cyberbullying and how it affects young adults. And so I am really interested in the topic of suicide, whether it's, with cyberbullying or just in general. So I am really excited to be here and, talk more about, suicide, talk about cyberbullying, bullying in general, and just how it can affect our youth.
Well, even before the pandemic, cyberbullying was on the rise because it's easy. It's very easy, it's so accessible.
Yes.
People change their names. They can hit somebody and escape, and with impunity, and there's almost no consequences for it. The pandemic made things worse because now people were getting their education virtually, online, and so forth, and parents were not as skilled or as adept as their children in terms of using technology. So they were really not too clear on what was going on. And certainly the specter of cyberbullying, and there's many other kinds of risk factors, including, people, involved in convincing their girlfriends to show pictures of them making love, and all kinds of sex kinds of trafficking kinds of things, and inappropriate photos. And that, to me, obviously,
yes, we discussed that in our paper. It's called sextortion.
Right, and that's obviously an increase as a result of the pandemic. So thank you for accepting my invitation. Puedes sacar el slide, Oscar, y ponme el número 4. And last but hard, Maryland, right, el 4. So last in my presentation of guests, but hardly the least, just the way it happened. So Marilyn, gracias por aceptar mi invitación. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you here?
Hi, everybody. So my name is Marilyn. I'm a BA MA student. So I'm delighted to be a guest on this show, especially surrounded by such scholars. And I really appreciate Dr. Aranda giving me the chance to discuss a topic that is very meaningful, because I have been conducting informal research since I first began as a freshman in John Jay. I would distribute surveys in my class, and I found out that a majority of the students in the communications class have reported suicidal ideation and high percentages of either thinking of committing or of taking their own lives within the next 4 years, which was back in 2020. So that is a very concerning statistic. And I really appreciate the fact that he's taking the time to do this, especially since I do interact with people who struggle with suicide as a crisis counselor on Crisis Text Line, which is a very important resource that I will mention later to be as a coping skill for anyone who's struggling with suicidal thoughts.
Thank you. And just in terms of bullying, for the viewers to know that institutes of higher learning and higher education are hardly free from bullying. I mean, there are many students who are in colleges and in master's or doctoral programs who also, and even in internship placements, who will report aspects of a bullying kind of behavior on the part of supervisors and or other students and or teachers. So it's certainly prevalent in many different contexts. Oscar, gracias. Puedes sacar slide número 4, ponme el 5. 5, this is a quick review. You can see basically what we were talking about. Mike, anything specific that you just want to re-emphasize on this particular slide? I mentioned it in our opening, but is there anything in particular here? I didn't bring up the LGBTQ and some of the other things. Anything here that you'd like to bring up?
Yeah, there's a few more things I think that can be helpful to kind of flesh out. I think starting off, when we start reading off the statistics, it's, we can see a number like 46,000, and no, it's a lot, but I think it helps to make it more concrete and putting it into context. So when we see that more Americans are killed by suicide or die by suicide than car crashes, natural disasters, violent crime, I think it's a startling statistic. Moving on from that, soldiers are more likely to die by suicide than by combat, excuse me. That number, I think, is up to veterans are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than in combat, which I think another sort of staggering example. And along with firefighters, police officers, realizing that with these groups, it's suspected that death by suicide is a result of shame and stigma around the issue of talking about feelings that come up. For example, these people are exposed to traumatic events. They experience mental health distress and can feel trapped by not being able to speak about it. Another theme that we'll, I think, talk about a lot tonight is speaking about these events when they come up. Another thing that I was thinking about too is with one death impacts 135 other people. There's this old idea that suicide only impacts the immediate family and friends of the person who died, and it's not true. It impacts so many additional people. Anecdotally speaking, when I talk about my work or my research, or even when I talked about going on the show with people, I had people coming up and sharing with me that I lost this loved one in my life to suicide. I think people are craving to talk about this issue, in part because it impacts so many people. And I can keep going too. You talked about it being the 12th leading cause of death. That was actually previously the 10th. One big piece of why that changed was due to COVID-19. And the emergence of COVID-19 deaths, increased deaths. I think it was of chronic liver disease and cirrhosis. So due to, again, this anomaly of sorts that this pandemic came, before suicide was a top 10 leading cause of death. And kind of continuing on too, at any point through Denise and Marilyn, I know that you talk a lot about cyberbullying. So there's vulnerable populations that are related to them. One of it to suicide, one of them being adolescents. There's a few things I can say about it. I'd love to have you jump in as well. When we talk about vulnerable groups, LGBTQ youth are an at-risk group. Along those same lines, adolescents are a significant one. There were some statistics going on that 70% of adolescents believe that the pandemic had negatively impacted their mental health. Extending onto that, I think another devastating impact has been the rise of social isolation, which I will talk about with adolescents, how damaging that can be. And I think along those same lines is we see a consistent issue of people who have suicidal ideation not getting the treatment, not getting the support that they need. Having an untreated mental health issue, depression and anxiety, particularly in children and adolescents and young adults, is a significant issue. I think up to 80% of people who die by suicide had an untreated mental health issue.
Okay. Oscar, puedes sacar el slide si todavía está. So, I just wanted also to mention that we're looking at the LGBTQ. I'm going to, unfortunately, my clinical forensic background tells me to raise a red flag, given everything that's happening in our political climate right now about LGBTQ and the recent Q Club shooting. And I have to believe that this is a potential added risk factor right now, unfortunately. Denise, Marilyn, anything to add to that particular slide before we get to the next slides that are more, informative?
Yeah, so I would just say with the LGBTQ plus community, in my research in 2021, the percentage of students who reported being cyberbullied was higher for the LGBTQ population at 27% than for students who were not sure about their sexual identity at 19%, which in turn was higher than the percentage of heterosexual students at 14%. So you notice that the students that were involved in the LGBTQ or students who are unsure about their sexuality, their levels of cyberbullying was a bit higher than those who are heterosexual. So you do notice a trend that it is the cyberbullying and bullying in general is higher for those in those smaller populations. And it's really unfortunate.
Do you think what's going on in society presently is going to make things worse?
Yeah,
100%. I think that when especially with young kids, because they're very impressionable, when they see violence on TV, a lot of times they may think it's okay. And sometimes when you're that young, you don't really form your own opinions yet. So they might see that, you might think, I'm not really too sure about me, but I know if I see someone else doing that, that might make it okay for me. So that might, increase the cyberbullying or just bullying in general, which is really sad.
Yeah.
Marilyn, you saying something?
Yeah, I actually wanted to jump in and say that according to Active Minds, suicide is actually the third leading cause of death among college students. And you could see that ever since the pandemic, relating back to the LGBTQ community, since they were isolated socially and they had to endure staying with their parents who may not support their sexuality, that definitely increased their suicidal ideation. And in terms of children, since they see all of this violence going on TV with the social learning theory behavior, they will learn that, ever since a young age, that's when bullying usually occurs. So they learn to be the bully and to make fun of people who identify with that sexuality, which is incredibly dangerous.
Okay. Oscar, por favor, slide número 6. So we're going to look at some of the causes of death, and ranked at the top we have firearms. More than half of suicides, approximately 53%, leading cause of death for both men and women. States with high gun ownership have twice the suicide rate compared to states with low gun ownership. So this is a good message above and beyond the message about violence and mass shootings. This is another good message for lawmakers to be aware of and for society to be aware of. It's obviously the most lethal means, 80 to 90% case fatality. And there's a strong relationship between suicide and school violence. So puedes sacar a slide, por favor. Anything to add by any of you three to that particular slide?
Yeah, I can start. I think, when we're talking about suicide, it's really important to always talk about the means. And having access to lethal means is a huge risk factor for successful suicides or suicides where people die by suicide. One really interesting study, this happened, I think, in Israel, think it was in 2006, where they restricted firearms for off-duty military. And what they found is that suicide rates dropped by 40%. So by simply removing lethal means from the general vicinity, suicide rates dropped in a pretty sharp amount. I think that's information that we can't turn away from when we talk about the relationship between violence and suicide.
No, I agree. We can't. Marilyn, Denise, anything to add to that before we talk about myths of suicide? Myths related to suicide?
Yeah, so like going back to the law policies, in a study that I reviewed for the paper, there's actually been a law in Canada after a suicide, and they found that most of the police actually didn't really believe it was necessary. They didn't believe that bullying should be a law, that like people should be or arrested for. And even one of them said that if they have to go around arresting people for name calling, they wouldn't do it. So that's a major issue in thinking about policies.
Do you think that those states that have laws that permit open carrying of guns, is that a risk factor?
It could be, but then again, there was a recent law in New York prohibiting guns, I believe, and there still are there's still a huge rise in gun-related violence.
Okay. Denise, anything to add? Next slide, we'll focus on myths.
Yeah, just going back to talking about the suicide with the young adults in the schools, unfortunately, many of these school shooters, when they do these shootings and then they get arrested, they say that they were bullied by a lot of the students in their school. So whether it's true or not, they're saying it, and it could be one of the reasons why they're doing these things, but it's a lot of the times it's the child's desire to exert control over their negative emotions that they're experiencing, and their bullying can manifest into suicidal ideation. So it's like they have no control over their emotions. Maybe they're being bullied at school, they're going through a lot at home. The only way they feel they can let go of everything is to commit suicide, which is really sad. So in some cases, they, take out they go to the school and take it out at school, or in some cases they do it at home.
Okay. Oscar, por favor, puede poner el número 7. So this particular slide, I think, is very, very important to the viewers, okay? Because there are a lot of misconceptions, and some potentially raise red flags that we'll get into a little bit later, warning signs about suicide, people who
Yeah, so just going off of what he was saying, there are definitely a lot of myths, and I do come into these myths on social media because there are some people that say you shouldn't rely on crisis text lines such as the suicide hotline because they will send you to the hospital, they will send police to you, which is not exactly or not always true. There is a protocol that is followed, and that there are steps that are taken before those methods.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that, Marilyn. I think that when we're talking about suicide prevention lines and these different measures, I think that that's a normal fear that people have. And I think that happens with a lot of people when they're feeling suicidal. There's this question of what can I do with what I'm feeling? Who can I share it with? And, as we kind of unpack each of these, I think that'll be something that keeps coming up. As we're going through, I'm thinking, a very common myth that we see is the people who talk about suicide or attention seeking. I'm sure you both have encountered this in your work, especially Marilyn, even on the hotline, the crisis line. What you find, though, is people that are suicidal aren't attention seeking, what is more likely happening is that they're trapped in pain. They're potentially feeling really hopeless and helpless. From my experience, people who are suicidal have done a really good job of exhausting every opportunity in their life to get help that they feel comfortable pursuing. That might be a very small net of people, though. And they've also tried, I think, doing a number of things that help them, feel better, and they feel stuck.
So I think we've been having some technological.
Looks like we. Okay. Sounds good. Looks like we're going to a commercial.
Okay.
Are we on commercial now, or are we still going?
Sigue en sintonía de nuestra programación.
La Tribuna Hispana USA es el periódico para los que leemos en español. En circulación desde 1988 en Long Island y New York City. Contamos con diferentes ediciones por zonas, impresas y digitales, donde usted puede leer las últimas noticias nacionales, internacionales y publicar sus anuncios para la comunidad. Atención empresarios, comerciantes y profesionales, si usted desea aumentar sus ventas, llame ahora mismo al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 4, o visítenos en el www.latribunahispana.com.
Tribuna TV, 24 horas al día, 7 días a la semana, 365 días al año. Un mundo de información para ti, al alcance de tu dedo.
Escucha Tribuna Radio las 24 horas del día. Tribuna Radio desde cualquier lugar del mundo. Tribuna Radio en el www.tribunaradio.us. Tribuna Radio, la música que quieres escuchar. Tribuna Radio, la mejor programación. Tribuna Radio, programas de entrevistas. Para más información, llámanos al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 5, o escríbenos a sales@tribunaradio.us.
¿Te perdiste tu programa favorito en Tribuna TV? Esto no volverá a pasar porque ahora te presentamos videos on demand. Cualquier día, a cualquier hora y en cualquier lugar. Visita nuestra sección Videos on Demand en nuestra página web o en nuestras aplicaciones para Android y iPhone. Entra al nombre del programa que quieres ver, elígelo con un solo clic y disfruta de los mejores programas de Tribuna TV, la televisión en sus manos.
Some technological issues. Did it affect you three or just me?
Oh no, we were discussing actually. We took over.
Yeah.
The slides.
You jumped in.
Well, we're at miss. I'm glad that you did. I mean, like having technological issues, I didn't put it down as a risk factor, but as a risk factor for a professor and a TV host for being stressed. So did you manage to discuss all of the myths, and we can take the slide down, or is the slide up, or should we go into slide number 8?
We had gotten through the first one. Me and Marilyn had started to introduce it. So if we could put that slide back up, that would be great. We can go through the rest of the list.
Okay, por favor, puede poner el número 7 de nuevo. And to all viewers, be aware that stress comes in many packages in many shapes and forms and affects different people. This is called eustress, I believe. Okay, so talking about suicide makes somebody likely to act on it. If someone's really suicidal, they're probably going to kill themselves anyway, so why bother? Suicide attempts or deaths happen without warning. People who kill themselves are selfish, cowards, weak. Talk therapy and medications don't work. Puede sacar el slide, and I'm just going to leave it to you three, Micah, Denise, and Marilyn. Just focus on some of the myths, okay? Puede sacar el slide.
Yeah, so we talked about the attention-seeking piece, but another important one that comes to my mind, really talking about that it will make someone more likely to act, or really if they're suicidal, it's not going to do anything anyways, that they're going to die by suicide no matter what. And that is simply not the case. When someone is suicidal and they get the opportunity to talk about it, or if someone is in distress and gets the opportunity to talk about it, they're much more likely to feel a sense of relief and connection that they could finally open up to someone. And what you find is that most people who attempt suicide actually don't go on to die by suicide. And this idea that, if someone's suicidal, it's going to happen anyways, or it's inevitable, isn't true, because what you find is that people are often only suicidal for a short amount of time. It comes and goes depending on, the stresses in life. And by being able to meet someone during that critical moment, you can significantly reduce the stress that they're going through. You can build connection, and what that results in is that someone's much less likely to attempt suicide.
I 100% agree with that. I think a lot of the times, they need someone to talk to. And, when it comes to going back to bullying, a lot of the cases that I have studied, a lot of these young adults committed suicide because they were being threatened with something and they didn't want their friends and family to find out about it, and they didn't know what else to do but take their life. A lot of these cases they just felt very hopeless and they felt unheard and they felt like they had no other choice but to permanently get out of the situation. So when people say that, talk therapy doesn't help, that medication doesn't work, I think those people are, they haven't been in a situation where they've been around somebody who is, suffering from mental health issues or just going through a really hard time. But just having somebody to talk to and having somebody to really listen to you and connect with you can really change, a lot of things.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. And
Marilyn, anything to add before we get into some terms?
Yeah, and definitely going really quickly back to bullying. Since they are being bullied, they don't have that friend. So even just one friend can really do such a difference. They just listen. Just that's all that person needs. They want someone to listen.
Absolutely.
This is probably, just to make an analogy. Puedes sacar a slide, Oscar, por favor. Just to make an analogy, it's probably not that dissimilar to people who end up engaging in some sort of a violent act. They were reaching out, they were trying to talk, they didn't get a response. There was a failure of connectedness, which is something that we'll be focusing on a little bit later. So it can go in two different directions. Okay, just to be clear. Puede poner el slide número 8, por favor. So we are going to be getting into risk factors, protective factors, and warning signs in other slides. So I'm just going to very briefly ask, what is the difference between suicidal desire versus suicidal intent, and thoughts, feelings of wanting to die versus having an intention to end one's life, and suicidal behaviors and attempts? So let's look at the first three, and what are some differences? Because I think that the general viewing public probably looks at them all as the same, and somebody may be verbalizing, oh God, this is so horrible. I don't know that I can continue living this way. It's not the same thing as somebody saying, my life is going nowhere. I've tried no matter what I do, nothing seems to happen. And I'm depressed and I'm not sure what I'm going to do, which I think is certainly a much higher risk.
Yeah, definitely. There is a huge misconception that suicidal ideation is some sort of disease, which is not true at all, because as college students, like I know some of you can relate that, like especially with finals coming up, we have thoughts of just wanting to give up, which doesn't necessarily mean we want to act on thoughts of suicide. We just have, emotions that come and go, and that's often a misconception that leads to stigma, and many people don't want to open up about it.
Okay, Oscar, puedes sacar a slide. Denise, Micah, anything to share? I'll add that with many of my patients, I specialize a lot in behavioral medicine, so I work with patients who've been injured in some way, either occupational injuries, motor vehicle accidents, assaults. Personal injuries come in many different forms. And among many of my patients, when there's loss of function, loss of income, aches and pains, they're not able to do what they were doing before. They have to go to doctor after doctor after doctor. They get denied by insurance carriers. It's like one stressor after another, and they think this is horrible. I don't really know that I want to go on this way, like it's really, life is hardly worth living this way, but they're not actually verbally vocalizing, I'm doing something that I'm going to take my life. And I'm very, very cautious with these patients to talk about it and encourage them to discuss it. And what thoughts do you have, as opposed to just ignoring it? So, further thoughts about those three aspects?
Yeah, oh, Denise, you go.
I was just going to say, I also had some patients when I was working, they all suffered from traumatic brain injuries, whether it be a stroke or just a car accident. And, the brain, their injury affected their ability to speak. And, that's very traumatic on somebody. And a lot of my patients had suicidal ideations. Some patients would, because they couldn't speak, they would write, I want to die or let me die, but they wouldn't do anything to actually make it happen. And then I had some other patients that would try to pull their trach out or pull their feeding tube out. So I have seen both the differences in, actually trying to commit suicide and, just feeling so helpless that, I'm in this terrible situation and there's, really, I just feel really helpless. And it's really sad to see both, but I noticed that for the patients who just had the thoughts, kind of just helping them, talking them through it, just explaining to them, like, I know this happened to you, but you've made so much progress and you're going to make more. Honestly, just talking to them and then getting them out. I know it sounds a little crazy, but getting them outside, getting them some fresh air from being cooped up in the rehab all day, honestly changed their mood. They just wanted to go back to being, who they were. So that's kind of the differences I've personally seen in thoughts and, actual practice.
You can probably look at a person who in some way has expressed something related to a suicidal ideation or intent. You can probably look at them as falling somewhere on a spectrum. And you need to look at the spectrum in terms of protective factors that we'll focus on, risk factors that we'll focus on, and warning signs. So in some instances, again, the opportunity to talk is important. In other instances where you have a warning sign and the threat seems to be imminent, you may have to do something a lot more than just at that point sit back and talk. So I think that's a fair way of looking at it, as falling somewhere on a continuum. Micah, you had something to share?
Yeah. There's a couple things. One, what you both were saying about chronic illness makes sense. One of the risk factors we're going to see for suicide is chronic illness. And Denise, with the example of what you're talking about with your patients, about how crucial it is to feel human is, I think, so essential for restoring that in people who have, experienced trauma, who've experienced suicidality. It's a sense of, feeling connected with their life again and having a meaning and purpose. And when we're distinguishing desire from intent, I'm thinking of a few callers that I'd had when I worked at the suicide prevention hotline. I would often get a lot of people who said, I'm in a lot of pain. I just can't, I don't know if I can go on. I don't want to die by suicide, or I don't want to kill myself because the people in my life are going to be impacted. I almost wish that I could be walking down the street and a car would hit me. It wouldn't be my fault. But then people don't feel guilty about me, but I'm getting out of this pain. And they didn't want to attempt suicide, but they wanted the pain that they were in to go away and to end. And that's an experience of being trapped. When we're distinguishing for the general public, I think one really important piece to distinguish desire from intent is to look at if someone has a plan. By having that plan to end their life, if they've thought about that, when it starts to become more concrete, and when you maybe start to notice preparatory behaviors that someone might be indicating that they're moving towards ending their life, that's where you want to be really mindful of how this person's doing, checking in. And the first thing you can do is talk to them. And then we'll go into what you can do when we start getting some more severe instances of suicide or suicidal ideation and intent.
So, Michael, when you brought up the term of suicide hotline, I had like an association, all of a sudden a flashback to when I worked at a community mental health center in New Jersey. I was a doctoral student at the Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology. Shout out, Rutgers. I was intimately involved in the suicide manual, the suicide prevention manual. And because I wrote well, they actually asked me to revise it. And I revised their suicide prevention manual, and it was used by the people that were manning the hotlines. It was it was something really. You just brought me back this flashback. I'd like to think
you got a direct thing.
So, Oscar, por favor, puedes sacar el 8 and let's move al 9. We're going to look at risk and some risk factors, mental health disorders, especially depression. Previous suicide attempt is very important. Family history, another important. Suicide, social isolation. I know that you did stuff on it, and I've looked into social isolation as both sides of the coin. That on the one hand, it may lead to self-destructive behaviors, but on the other hand, the flip side of the coin, it could lead to outward destructive kinds of behaviors. Physical illnesses, unemployment, family conflict and divorce, being locked up, military affiliation, childhood abuse. We've spoken about this in the context of domestic violence on this show many times before. And you'll recall I did a show about the issue with Michael Valvo and Thomas Valvo. Impulsivity, so that's risky to the extent that somebody is too quick to act and they jump to act before slowing down and thinking something through. NSSI, that's non-suicidal self-injury, sleep issues, and seasonal variation. We do have increases of depression, with the winter months. It's more seasonal, and we can take the slide down. So why don't we let's talk for a few minutes about risk factors, okay? Puedes sacar el slide. So who wants to jump in?
I'd say that bullying is definitely a huge risk factor among adolescents because it's kind of like they don't really have any advocates. They're alone. They, especially cyberbullying, because they're literally this whole generation is mostly on their phones, especially TikTok, a very, very controversial app nowadays. You know, there's a lot of things going on in that app, and it's to a point where there's even people trolling on live streams, telling people to end their lives, encouraging them even. So that's definitely a huge risk factor, just being online, which is inevitable, but yeah, it's a huge risk.
The thing with cyberbullying also that makes it so potentially dangerous is that you have people jumping in, and it can become like a group cyberbullying. So others will chime in and add to the mix. It's not a single voice that's engaging in cyberbullying. Yeah. It can be other peers, and it can be like a cyberbullying group that's doing this. And again, they escape with impunity. It's very difficult to monitor them. And schools won't do anything unless there seems to be imminent threat. And similarly with criminal conduct, there has to be some sort of an imminent threat that was made. So many of these things are unreported, nothing happens. And parents, like I said, who are not as technologically savvy as their kids, probably don't know what's going on at all. Marilyn?
Agree with that. So I was just saying that I agree with that, because I think social media and just this new technology nowadays is very new, especially with these parents not really understanding it. So it's very easy for kids to have access to their cell phones, to laptops, computers, iPads, and for them to be on these social media websites, different, apps, and for their parents to not know what they're doing. And, bullying can come from all different types of platforms. It can be from Snapchat, sending a picture. It can be from Instagram, commenting on a photo, on YouTube. And what I've noticed in my research is that, honestly, YouTube is one of the highest percentages of cyberbullying, which really surprised me, because I thought it would have been TikTok or Instagram. But it's because maybe these kids or these social media personalities are posting videos on YouTube, and people are just leaving thousands of negative comments, some of those comments telling them to commit suicide, which is very harsh and just really sad.
Micah, anything to add before we get to the next slide?
Yeah, what's coming to my mind, we're talking about social media, we're talking about YouTube, these different channels, is the exposure to suicide being such a high risk factor. That's someone who has attempted suicide before, but if you know someone who's died by suicide, if you have a family history of suicide, or one that isn't mentioned here is if you hear about suicide in the news. What we find is there's increased suicidal ideation when a celebrity, a major public figure, dies by suicide. There was this was a few years ago now, but when 13 Reasons Why came out, they found out that after the release of that show, suicide rates in adolescents spiked. There's a lot of reasons.
It's a copycatting effect.
Yeah. The suicide kind of contagion that it can spread. There's an exposure element that's very, very harmful, and so being able to raise awareness of channels to go to for help. To mirror the amount of exposure that one suicide may get, I think is necessary to treat this issue.
Okay, we're going to jump to protective factors, and then we'll get back to the warning. Oscar, por favor, pues quiero brincar al número 11. Right. I wanted to give you risk factors. These are protective factors, social connectedness, family connectedness, school connectedness, being involved in the community, youth programs, engaged in mental health care, focusing on the future. Where am I going? Future oriented, sense of purpose, meaning, value, spirituality for many people, resilience on this show. We've spoken about this many, many times, Dr. Canaris, Peter Canaris, and I, being able to bounce back, being able to develop post-traumatic growth, just letting things slide, and you learn from the experience. Academic achievement. The academic achievement can be in schools, can be in institutions of higher learning. I'd like to add to that mix just things that you pick up on the internet. You take little courses, you read books, so you're doing you're doing learning, education, whatever means you have to educate yourself. I would indicate that Facebook and LinkedIn and TikTok are probably not the best sources for academic achievement, though. That's a caveat. Puede sacar el slide. So, dear guests, anything to say about the protective factors? And then I'm going to ask Oscar to go back to number 10.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I think of risk and protective factors, I often think of them together. I have always this visual of a scale in my mind, because sometimes I think we hear about risk factors and we think that if we have, maybe we heard about someone's suicide or we have been bullied, there's nothing that we can do, and that's simply not true. There's this, element of balancing out, and by instilling a lot of protective factors in one's life, you can really reduce the risk of suicide. And one of them being, you talked about this, the sense of purpose and the sense of meaning. We haven't talked about this yet, but with people who are suicidal, one experience is they're often ambivalent. They have reasons for living and reasons for dying. And it's really important when you're speaking with someone who's suicidal to talk about both, what is going on, to give them a space to, express what has happened that causes them to feel like they want to die, but then also really emphasizing their reasons for living, establishing a sense of meaning. I love what you said, Dr. Aranda, about post-traumatic growth. How do we make sense of our lives after something traumatic has happened? I think is vital for people who have experienced suicidal ideation to find a sense of meaning.
All right. Let me just jump in quickly, and then I'll ask Marilyn and Denise to chime in. I see protective factors and risk factors as fluid. They're not cast in stone. Some things, unfortunately, are cast in stone. I mean, if you lost your arm, you lost your arm. It's not going to grow back. But there are things that it's fluid. So that if you consider that a formula or an intervention, which we'll get into interventions, is to, when you're doing an assessment, an evaluation, focusing on somebody who's come to you for some reason, or you may be worried about somebody, you look at what are the protective factors, what's in this person's life. You want to try to maximize the number of protective factors, make the individual aware of what they are, use them. Sometimes they're there and they're not being utilized. And at the same time, see if you can pad them. Are there other, like if they're missing education, add education. If you're missing, you need a raise in your job, focus on assertiveness skills so you can approach your employer and get a raise, or keep things open and prepare a CV and learn how to look around and see what you can do to increase your income. What can you do to increase your connectedness? Similarly, part of the formula is to look at those risk factors and minimize them, decrease them, eliminate them. If you don't have the education, work on eliminating it. You don't have the job, work on providing some training or some resources to help financially that particular person. So again, I don't want to belabor too much, but I think it's not cast in stone. It's fluid, and every case has to be looked on individually. There's nothing that you can use as a model that's going to be across the board for everybody. Denise, Marilyn, anything to add?
Yeah, so definitely on like overturning the risk factor. Like for example, being online as a risk factor, you could definitely overturn that, and instead, it is inevitable. So there are some pages on social media that are focusing on mental health and opening up about suicidal ideation. So these are definitely some things to keep in mind. And also more services should be promoted. Like for example, the John Jay College Instagram page does promote the Wellness Center, which should be promoted more, because some students don't even know that there is a Wellness Center available for counseling, and at most times it is free. So they should definitely take advantage of those.
Okay. Denise, anything to add? We're going to get into warning signs next.
Yeah, I also think it's important, especially for young adults, to have that have a strong family, because when these young kids go through things, sometimes they don't feel comfortable talking to their parents. So I think that having that strong bond and strong connection with your parent and with your child can most likely save a lot of lives. because if these kids are being bullied online and they feel comfortable going to the parents, then the parents can go to the school board or go to the, the mayor, the governor to get these laws passed, because kids can't do it on their own. They need the adults to help them.
Okay. Oscar, por favor, si no has sacado slide, sácalo y quiero que regreses al slide número, un segundito. Dame el slide número 10. Yes. We're going to look at warning signs. I purposely put this one for after risk factors and protective factors, because this is higher. This is at a higher level of need of intervention. So, Micah, you want to take point on this in terms of the warning signs, and then Denise and Marilyn, please chime in. This is really higher risk. This is something you need to do something far more quickly. Take it far more seriously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is when you're talking about the difference between suicidal desire and ideate, or suicidal desire, ideation, and suicide intent. We're starting to get into the intent. We're starting to get into the preparatory behaviors. So if you're seeing someone in your life that's exhibiting some of these things, that this would be the time to intercede. So obviously, if someone is very concretely threatening to hurt themselves or others, that's the clearest warning sign in some ways that you're going to get. You're going to see that they're telling you, they're making claims that this is what they want to do, and they need support and they need help. And sometimes there are instances where people may say this multiple times, that they're thinking about ending their life. And if there's instances where it's hard to keep believing what this person is saying, what I'd want to encourage you on is to take them seriously each time, because you wouldn't want it to be the time that someone is calling out for help and they don't get the help that they need, and then that's the time that they would attempt. What you may also see is that someone is looking for ways to kill themselves. Maybe they're trying to acquire a means to attempt. That could be they're looking for pills, they're trying to acquire a weapon, some other type of means. I've had callers reach out saying that they're on their way to Home Depot to go to get a noose to attempt. So there's a lot of different ways that people may attempt, and be on the lookout for that. If someone may be talking about suicide, they may be talking about death. We see this a lot in adolescents in schools. If there's a journal assignment, you may hear an instance where a child disclosed that they wanted to die in that, or they were thinking about death. Behaviorally, it's convenient when someone tells you that they're thinking of suicide. You may not always see it though. And in those instances, a behavior that is pretty transparent could be maybe they're withdrawing from friends, from family, from society. We were talking extensively about how a sense of connectedness is vital as a protective factor. When people are distancing themselves from that, that's a clue that they may be suicidal. Along those feelings, maybe feeling helpless, feeling hopeless, or feeling trapped, a sense that what I'm going through won't get better. Other feelings that you may notice are rage, anger, agitation, and anxiety. We talked about impulsivity earlier, or engaging in reckless, risky activities. Someone may be talking about feeling, along hopeless, but having no sense of meaning or purpose. Another one to be mindful of is if a dramatic mood change just occurred. If someone went from, it can go in either direction in some ways. But if you see a dramatic change in mood, that is a signal that something may be going on. Someone may be suicidal and they may need some help.
So changes very important.
Oh, go on.
Changes from the norm. We're looking at changes in school functioning, changes in behavior, changes emotionally. Change is something that should be a red flag.
Yeah, and kind of extending on that message of change, one piece of people who are suicidal they might exhibit is change in their lifestyle by getting ready for their life after they have died by suicide. So you may see someone who's selling their possessions, maybe giving their belongings away, getting their affairs in order. They may be thinking about writing a will. They may have a pet or another animal, and they try to find someone to take care of it. That could be a sign that they're thinking about ending their life as well.
Marilyn, Denise, anything really sticks out? We only have about 10 minutes left, so we need to try to spin a little bit.
As many factors as there are and as many warning signs that there are, it unfortunately goes unseen time and time again. And in bullying, some people even join in and increase the warning signs. If they see someone getting bullied, they join in, especially cyberbullying. They see a post of someone making on a certain person and they repost it, they share it, they comment on it, they basically boost up this post, and unfortunately people just oversee them, and that is something that, as Micah highlighted, you should definitely take them seriously every time. If they even mention it, it doesn't hurt to ask.
Okay. Denise, anything to add before we get to Micah's research?
The one example of warning signs that I've experienced was the video, I don't know if anyone's seen it, of Amanda Todd. She was a 15-year-old girl in Canada who ended up committing suicide after she posted a video on YouTube. And she wrote on little index cards about the cyberbullying that she experienced. And she was saying that she doesn't know, she feels helpless, she doesn't know what to do. And I believe a few days after she posted that video, that's when she committed suicide. So that was kind of her, reaching out for help, asking someone to help her. And she didn't directly say in that video that she wanted to commit suicide, but she was feeling she did feel very hopeless, very helpless. She was just feeling like her life had no meaning because this man was threatening to expose her. So that was one of my first experiences of the warning signs of suicide.
Okay. Oscar, por favor, baja el slide si todavía está y pon el 12. So, Mike, I'm going to leave this slide up for you just briefly to share the viewers what you did, and then we're going to move into interventions.
Sounds good. And I'm also mindful of time, so I can be quick. But so the title of my research project was The Impact of Loneliness and Spirituality on Suicidal Behavior in Young Adults During the COVID-19 Pandemic. So I've been collecting data from a sample of college students, exploring different experiences during COVID-19. One of them being a sense of social isolation and disconnection from others, a sense of spirituality and connectedness to a religious tradition, but also to their own sense of existential well-being and their experience of suicidality. And what we found in our sample was that our results demonstrated that social isolation was a risk factor for suicidal ideation in a young adult sample. And young adults are, we've talked about a lot, a vulnerable population for suicide. They're at risk, especially in this time of development in their lives, emerging adulthood, as people are moving on. Social isolation can be really debilitating. And what we were able to also demonstrate is that spirituality appeared to be a protective factor against suicide, which was crucial. And this was another interesting finding that we found, is we were wondering if someone felt alone, if they felt socially disconnected from people, but they had a high sense of spirituality, would they still feel suicidal? And what we found, though, is that spirituality did not moderate the relationship between suicidal ideation and social isolation. So what that meant is that, long story short, this suggested that social isolation is so detrimental to young adults that it undermines the protectiveness of spirituality. Say this time and time again, connectedness is such an integral part to the healing process of suicidal ideation and suicide. And our results in a young adult, in a vulnerable sample, demonstrated that as well.
All right, thank you. Well done. That was the basis of your research, which is why you won that the Poster Award. Oscar, por favor, saca el slide y pone el número 13. We're going to focus on intervention, since much of our conversation so far has lapped on interventions. I'm going to go through this a little bit more quickly. Obviously, we've all said talk to the person. It's okay to admit that it's scary to talk about suicide. You have to listen, reflect, mirror how the person is feeling. Not but active listen, empathy. Like, what can I do What is it that you need to feel better rather than, gee, you should avoid this, avoid that? People don't want to be necessarily lectured to. What has helped in the past? There's many potential coping strategies that worked in the past. Maybe they're not working now. Again, I go back to protective factors, risk factors. Do an assessment. What protective factors are there? Are they working or not? What protective factors can you increase, develop, add? What risk factors are there? What risk factors can you decrease, extinguish, eliminate, overcome? Develop new coping strategies. Find meaningful activities. What is it that you'd like to do? What can you do? What interests you? The connectedness, we've gone over this several times. You have to take care of yourself physically, mentally, emotionally. Seek professional care. Goes without saying. If you can do something to help a person, that's fine. A family member, a close friend, etc. Clergy. Know when to reach out and ask for help. You can call 988. That's a suicidal line. And in emergencies, call 911. And if need be, contact a professional psychologist or mental health counselor or psychiatrist. Puede sacar el slide número 13. Anything to add to that before we get to resources? Because we're on the last slide now.
One thing that I'd say is I was thinking of a call that I had. It was one of my first ones that I had when I worked at the suicide prevention hotline, and someone reached out and they told me that they were, the first thing they said was that they're thinking of walking to a bridge nearby and jumping. They wanted to give one last chance to talk to someone before they did it. And I was terrified when I got that because it was my first safety plan call. But rather than, I took a breath, and rather than getting sort of sucked into being afraid, I sat and I said, it sounds like you've been in a lot of pain for a really long time, and I'm really glad you called. And the person immediately broke down and opened up. So I really want to encourage, even if you do not feel prepared at all, sitting with someone in what they're going through and in their pain and giving them a space to talk about it and to show concern is one of the most vital things that you can do.
Ironically, Micah, people would not know how many times they have saved the life just by talking. We don't have those statistics. So somebody saying, well, because Micah spoke to me, I decided that I wasn't going to jump off the roof or blow my brains out. I'm being, a little bit facetious here, but I think it's reality. We do not know the cases where it's been a successful prevention. We don't know it. You have to just take it on faith that you're doing okay, and then maybe you did succeed in stopping one person's mind. And to me, that's wonderful, just being able to do that. Denise, Marilyn, anything special about the interventions? And then we'll get into slide number 14, our last slide.
I think Micah pretty much covered it perfectly, because I have also been on that end of the line where I didn't know what to do or what to say. I didn't want to make anything quote unquote worse, I guess. But it does, as I would take more texters, I could see that they really just wanted someone to listen. They necessarily didn't want anyone to really solve, I guess, their pain, because they know that it's something that can't be solved, but they just wanted someone to listen.
Denise, any further comment on interventions?
No, I definitely agree with Marilyn and Micah. They pretty much said it all. It's just having someone to talk to and just having someone to listen to them while they're in pain, just so they know that someone's there to support them.
Yeah, I often have wondered when we look at the statistics about violence and we see that there's no change. And then, in fact, the numbers are increasing. And then you have to sit there thinking, but there's so many places that are really trying to do something. They offer programs, they've done research, they develop all sorts of skills and all sorts of risk management protocols and looking at risk factors and monitoring a building and video cameras and connecting with the community. And it almost would sound like, well, nothing seems to work. And I think that that's incorrect, because what we do not know in the world of violence deaths also. We don't know the instances where somebody was prevented from doing a violent act, from engaging in a violent act. So similarly with suicide, and I repeat again, you don't know the instances that when you reached out to do something, to what extent you had an impact in alleviating that person's depression or thoughts of suicide, and or even going the final step and engaging in some sort of suicidal behavior. Oscar, por favor, el número 14. These are resources for the viewers. Myself, you have my contact information, you have my consultant, Dr. Canaris. The top several resources are specifically geared to this particular topic, the 988 Suicide Crisis Hotline. Samaritans, make a note of this, take a photograph, or take Trevor Project, National Alliance of Mental Illness, NAMI. They are super. Just go to the internet and click NAMI, and you'll be surprised how much stuff is available. Zero Suicide with the link. And I provided the information that I routinely give from New York State Psychological Association, the American Psychological Association, Suffolk County Psychological Association, Westchester County, and several of the regions of connected with New York State Psychological Association, as well as the affiliates. What I did want to say is New York State Psychological Association also has a disaster resource network. I'm one of the co-chairs of that particular network, and it deals with disasters of all kinds, including, and it would be disasters and issues and incidents that there might be a risk or propensity towards acting out through self-destruction that might raise the risk of suicide, as well as violence. And we also have a trauma special interest group that focuses on providing many, many workshops that deal with various aspects of disaster. So I wanted to give a shout out to NISPA's DRN and to their trauma special interest group. Oscar, puedes sacar los slides. So we're at the end. Let me just ask you for your parting comments. Micah, any parting comments before we wrap up?
Well, we've covered it a lot. It's no secret that by this time that I think talking to someone is one of the best solutions to it, being open, connecting with other people. What I'd say is with suicide, it's an issue of hope as well. And finding that in different areas of your life as you can is vital. But yeah, for the most part, reaching out to connect with the people that matter and reaching out resources, and that by seeking out help, things do improve. What we find is that, one of the best indicators that mental health treatment works is if someone has a desire to get better. That's one of the factors that leads to the most change. So even having that desire to improve, even if things feel bleak, is a really important piece of the healing process.
Thank you. Denise, parting comment?
Yeah, I would just like to say, thank you for having me on. And this was a really great discussion. It was really nice to hear everyone's thoughts and, what everyone had to say. And, my heart is obviously with the cyberbullying piece, but I think, it really affects the young people, especially over COVID. And I think that more research needs to be done. I think more young adults, especially middle school to high school, they need to be in some kind of, trauma counseling and some kind of therapy because, they're going through puberty. They're already going through a hard time. To add bullying on top of it is, really detrimental to their, mental health. So I just, I'm really passionate about, psychology and just, everything that we talked about today. So thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you. Marilyn, parting comment?
I am very delighted to have been a guest on this show, especially talking about such an important topic. And I do agree with Dr. Aranda that this isn't a topic that could be covered in like 1 hour and I believe 25 minutes now. This is something that takes a long time to process, especially with all the information that has just been covered and wonderful research information as well from Micah and Denise. So also just wanted to add crisis text line as another resource for those who do not feel comfortable talking on the phone. You could easily text the line, and me or any of my fellow volunteer counselors will be there available 24/7.
You want to repeat that?
Yes, crisistextline.com. You could either search it up or text the number 988 and they will connect you with a counselor over the text.
Wonderful. Oscarcito? Oscar's focused on the cold as a respecter. So, so don't catch the flu. Wear a mask. We're in a heightened COVID and flu season still, and RSVs out there, and be careful. To my guest, it was a delight having you. I'm so thrilled that I had you, Micah, and Denise and Marilyn. It was my pleasure having you as guest. It was wonderful. To my viewers, I hope that we provided a lot of material, but I hope that we provided you with a reasonable overview. And if you walk away with the message that you really want to focus on decreasing risk factors, increasing protective factors, being aware of warning signs, not shying away from talking, and knowing when you cannot do something and recognizing the need for professional intervention, then I think I will have done my job. I hope all my viewers stay healthy and safe. In 2 weeks, I'm going to do my last show. This is show number 82, I believe. And next show will be with Dr. Canaris, focusing on the end of the year and outlook for 2023. I always give words of connectedness. My viewers, stay connected with your neighbors, with your community. If you see something, act. If you see some problem, you haven't seen your neighbor in a while, be aware, be kind. Right now, we're in difficult times. We're in a holiday season, so be very, very careful. I hope that you all profited from the show. Again, thank you to Micah, Denise, and Marilyn. Good